Varish's ears twitched as the heavy metal doors slammed shut behind her. The cold stone floor beneath her paws sent a shiver up her spine. The air smelled of blood, sweat, and fear. She knew exactly where she was. The Othar Dominion's arena, a place where captives fought for the entertainment of their cruel masters, a place where the weak died, and the strong died later. She clenched her fists, her sharp claws digging into her palms. The Othar had captured her during a skirmish on the outer rim of center-controlled space. She had fought, she had killed, but in the end, she had been outnumbered. And now, she was here. Her yellow eyes scanned the others in the pit. A mix of species, all from different corners of the galaxy. Some looked strong, with thick muscles and sharp fangs. Others looked weak, their bodies trembling, their eyes filled with hopelessness. And then there was him. Varish narrowed her eyes at the human sitting in the corner. He looked unimpressive. Soft skin, no claws, no fangs. His short brown hair was messy, his clothes torn and stained. He didn't stand like a warrior. He wasn't checking his surroundings like a hunter. He was just sitting there, legs crossed, staring at the floor. Pathetic. Varish snorted and turned away. She had heard of humans before. A young species. Weak, slow, not built for war like the Xenar. Some called them intelligent, but what good was intelligence when you had no fangs to fight with? A loud clang echoed through the arena. The Othar guards stood on a raised platform, looking down at them. One of them, a towering brute with dark red armor, stepped forward. "You fight," he growled, his voice booming, "or you die." A metal gate opened on the far side of the pit. A beast stepped out. It was massive, at least 3 meters tall, covered in thick gray scales. Its long tail dragged behind it, sharp spines running down its back. Its glowing red eyes locked onto the captives, and it let out a deep, rumbling growl. The crowd above roared in excitement. Varish tensed, preparing to move. The beast would attack soon. The moment it charged, she would dodge, strike, and... Someone screamed. A reptilian captive tried to run, but the beast lunged, its jaws snapping shut around the poor soul. A sickening crunch followed, and the body went limp. The fight had begun. Varish moved fast, darting to the side as the beast turned toward another captive. She needed a plan. Taking it head-on would be foolish. They had no weapons, only their claws, fangs, and instincts. She noticed others trying to fight. A hulking brute with 4 arms charged the beast, swinging wildly. The beast caught him with one swipe of its tail, sending him crashing into the wall. Varish hissed in frustration. These fools were just throwing themselves at it. Then she saw the human. He wasn't moving. He just stood there, watching. His eyes, once dull and distant, were now sharp, focused. "What are you doing?" Varish growled, stepping beside him. "Fight or die, human." He didn't answer immediately. Instead, his gaze followed the beast's movements. His expression wasn't one of fear, but of calculation. Then, finally, he spoke. "It's injured." Varish blinked. "What?" "Its left leg," he said, nodding toward the beast. "It's limping." Varish looked closer. He was right. The beast's movements were slightly uneven. One of its legs had a faint burn mark, probably from a previous fight. "Help me get its attention," the human said. Varish hesitated. Was this human actually trying to fight with strategy? The beast roared again, slamming its claws into the ground. The arena shook. There was no time to doubt him. Varish let out a fierce snarl, darting to the side and slashing at the beast's wounded leg. It howled in pain, its head whipping around to face her. That was the opening the human needed. He sprinted forward, not toward the beast's head, but toward its side. He grabbed a loose rock from the ground and smashed it against the beast's injured leg. The beast staggered. It roared in pain. It was off balance. Varish didn't waste the opportunity. She leaped onto its back, using her claws to grip its scales. With a fierce growl, she ripped into its spine. The beast let out one final pain shriek before it collapsed to the ground. The crowd above erupted in a mix of cheers and boos. The Othar guards seemed amused. Varish stood over the fallen beast, breathing heavily. The human, Ethan, dusted himself off and looked up at her. "Told you it was injured." Varish narrowed her eyes at him. This human was different. She had expected him to die, expected him to be weak. But instead, he had done the unthinkable. He had fought before acting. And that, she realized, was more dangerous than claws or fangs. Varish watched Ethan carefully. The human sat on the cold stone floor, leaning against the arena wall, as if he had not just helped kill a massive beast. His breathing was steady, his expression calm. She did not understand him. Most captives in the Othar arena fought to survive. Some fought because they were warriors. Others fought because fear made them desperate. But this human, he was different. He had not fought with brute strength. He had not panicked. He had observed, waited, and then acted with precision. And now he was resting as if none of it had mattered. Varish narrowed her golden eyes. "You are strange, human." Ethan glanced up at her. "I get that a lot." She huffed, sitting beside him, but keeping a small distance. She did not trust him. Not yet. "Why did you help me?" she asked. "I could have killed the beast on my own." Ethan shrugged. "Maybe. But why take the risk?" Varish flicked her tail in irritation. "I do not need help to survive." Ethan smiled slightly. "Then why are you still here?" Varish frowned. She had no answer. Before she could say anything else, the heavy doors of the arena slammed open. Othar guards marched inside, their armor clanking. The other captives tensed, some stepping back, others lowering their heads in submission. A tall Othar officer entered. His deep red armor gleamed under the dim lights. His sharp, reptilian eyes scanned the prisoners before landing on Ethan and Varish. He smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. "You fought well today," he said in a deep, rumbling voice. "But the games are not over." He turned and gestured toward the metal gates. The doors creaked open, revealing another, much larger arena on the other side. The crowd above roared in excitement. The Othar officer pointed at Ethan. "You, human, you fight next." Ethan didn't move. The guard stepped forward, grabbing his arms. He didn't resist, but he didn't look afraid either. Varish watched him closely. She expected him to fight back, to struggle like the others who were chosen. But instead, he remained calm. They dragged him into the larger arena and threw him onto the sand. The crowd above laughed, their alien voices echoing through the massive coliseum. Varish pushed herself up, her claws itching to act, but the gates slammed shut between them. She could only watch. A new opponent entered the arena, a massive four-armed warrior from a species Varish did not recognize. His muscles were thick like stone, and his eyes burned with fury. The Othar officer grinned. "Fight." The warrior roared and charged at Ethan. Varish tensed. The human had no weapons, no armor. He was going to die. But Ethan did not move. The four-armed warrior swung a heavy fist at him, an attack that could have crushed bone. At the last second, Ethan ducked. The punch barely missed his head. The warrior staggered forward, unbalanced. Ethan took a single step back and raised his hands. "I'm not going to fight you," he said, his voice steady. The warrior growled in confusion. Then, enraged, he swung again. Ethan sidestepped. The attack hit nothing but air. Varish's ears twitched in disbelief. He's dodging, on purpose. The crowd above booed, angry that there was no bloodshed. The warrior attacked again and again. Each time, Ethan avoided the strike by the smallest margin. But he never attacked back. The Othar officer snarled, "Fight, human, or die." Ethan remained still. His chest rose and fell steadily. The warrior hesitated. His breathing was heavier now, his attack slower. He was using too much energy. Ethan met his gaze. You don't have to do this. The warrior's fists trembled. His anger faded into something else. Uncertainty. He stepped back. The arena fell into silence. The Othar officer's eyes flared with rage. He gestured to his guards. A sharp crack echoed through the Colosseum as a guard fired an electric whip, striking the warrior's back. The massive alien roared in pain, his body shaking. Ethan's fists clenched. Stop it. The officer ignored him. You are here to fight, human, not to show mercy. Ethan's expression darkened. And you think beating people makes you strong. The Othar officer laughed. Strength is the only thing that matters. Ethan stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, he looked around at the crowd. He looked at the other captives watching through the gate. And then he did something unthinkable. He turned his back on the warrior. And he sat down. The entire arena gasped. The crowd fell silent, stunned. Varish's claws dug into her palm. What is he doing? The Othar officer's face twisted in fury. Kill him. The four-armed warrior stepped forward. His fists were clenched. His breathing was heavy, but he did not attack. Instead, he stared at Ethan, then looked at the crowd, then at the guards. And then, slowly, he sat down too. The Othar officer's face went pale. Other prisoners in the cages watched closely. Ethan had done what no one had ever dared to do in the Othar arena. He had refused to be their entertainment. And now, others were beginning to follow him. Varish had never seen anything like this before. Ethan sat in the sand, his legs crossed, his expression calm. The four-armed warrior sat beside him, his massive body tense, as if waiting for an attack. But he did not move. He had made his choice. The crowd above erupted in confusion. Angry shouts echoed through the Colosseum. They had come to see blood, not this refusal. The Othar officer's face darkened with rage. You will fight, or you will die. Ethan did not react. His gaze remained steady. Varish pressed her claws into her palm, watching closely. What is this human thinking? He should be trying to survive. He should be fighting like everyone else. Instead, he was doing nothing. The officer raised his hand. The guards aimed their weapons at Ethan. Last chance, human. The officer's voice was cold. Fight. Now. Ethan finally spoke. No. A sharp crack filled the air as the electric whip lashed across Ethan's back. His body jolted, but he did not cry out. Another crack. Varish's ears twitched. The human's hands trembled slightly, but he did not move. He did not scream. He did not beg. The Othar officer's nostrils flared. You think you are strong. Strength is power. Strength is control. You are nothing but weak prey. Ethan took a slow breath and looked up. His eyes, blue and steady, met the officer's gaze. You don't understand strength. The officer's face twisted in fury. Enough of this. Kill him. The guards raised their weapons. And then, the four-armed warrior moved. With a sudden, powerful strike, he grabbed the nearest guard and threw him across the arena. The alien's massive strength sent the Othar crashing into the stone wall with a sickening thud. The crowd gasped. Chaos erupted. More captives, who had been silent, watching, acted. A reptilian fighter lunged at a guard, knocking his weapon away. A small, insect-like alien darted between the guard's legs, tripping them. A towering brute roared and slammed a fist into the sand, sending dust flying into the air. Varish felt something strange inside her chest. Was this human actually turning the prisoners into a force? She didn't have time to think. A guard rushed toward her, a shock baton raised. Varish moved. She ducked low, swept her tail behind his legs, and knocked him down. Before he could recover, she slashed her claws across his helmet, sending him into unconsciousness. The Othar officer stumbled back, his eyes wide with disbelief. This was not supposed to happen. The captives were meant to be broken, weak, obedient, but now they were fighting back. And it all started because of one human. Varish turned to Ethan, who had pushed himself up from the ground. His back was bleeding, but his eyes burned with determination. "We need to move," he said. "They'll send reinforcements." Varish hesitated for only a second. Then she nodded. Agreed. Ethan grabbed a fallen guard's weapon and tossed it to her. She caught it easily. The four-armed warrior stepped beside them. "What now, human?" Ethan scanned the arena. The captives were fighting, but it wouldn't last. The Othar had too many guards, too much firepower. If they stayed here, they would all die. "We escape," Ethan said simply. Varish's ears flicked. "And how do you plan to do that, human?" Ethan gave a small grin. "You'll see." Moments later, the arena control room. The Othar officers inside the control room were in chaos. "Lock down the cages," one of them shouted. "Send in the elite guards," another barked. The head officer snarled. "How is this happening? They are prisoners. They should be fighting each other." A terrified technician turned to the officer. "Yes, sir, the main gate has been compromised." "What?" The screen showed a group of captives moving toward the exit. In the center of the group was the human. The officer's hands curled into fists. "Shut it down. Now." "Sir, we—" Before the technician could finish, the door to the control room exploded inward. A figure stepped through the smoke. Ethan Carter. His clothes were torn, his back still bleeding from the whip, but his expression was fierce. He held a stolen Othar rifle in his hands. Behind him stood Varish, the four-armed warrior, and several other freed captives. The officer's blood ran cold. "Impossible." Ethan tilted his head. "See the thing about humans." He raised the rifle and aimed it at the control panel. "We don't like being caged." He pulled the trigger. Boom! The console erupted in sparks, and across the arena, the massive steel gates slammed open. The captives were free. The moment the gates slammed open, chaos erupted across the Othar Colosseum. The prisoners didn't hesitate. They surged forward like a raging storm, fighting their way past stunned guards. The once helpless captives had now become an unstoppable force. Ethan stood in the control room, smoke rising from the ruined console. His grip tightened on the stolen Othar rifle as he turned to his companions. "We don't have much time," he said. "They'll send reinforcements soon." Varish flicked her tail, her golden eyes sharp. "Then we must move fast." The four-armed warrior cracked his knuckles. "Let them come. I will crush them." Ethan smirked but shook his head. "We don't need more fights. We need to get out." He looked at the control panels, searching for anything useful. One screen caught his eye. It displayed a map of the entire Colosseum. A red mark blinked near the outer walls. "There," he pointed. "An underground tunnel. If we reach it, we can escape without facing the full Othar army." Varish glanced at the map. "It leads outside the city." Ethan nodded. "Looks like it. It's our best chance." A loud alarm blared across the Colosseum. A deep voice boomed through the speakers. "Escape atem htdetcted. All guardians. Eliminate the prisoners." Ethan cursed. "Move." The group rushed out of the control room, joining the wave of escaping prisoners. The Colosseum, once a place of death and suffering, had turned into a battlefield. The arena grounds. The Othar guards regrouped near the gates, blocking the prisoners' path. Their heavy armor gleamed under the arena lights, and their weapons hummed with deadly energy. One of them stepped forward, his deep red uniform marking him as a high-ranking officer. His reptilian eyes locked onto Ethan. "You." His voice was filled with hatred. "You started this." Ethan raised his rifle that didn't fire. He could tell this officer was different, stronger, faster, more experienced. If he wasted bullets, he wouldn't stand a chance. The officer grinned, showing rows of sharp teeth. "I will enjoy breaking you, human." Then he charged. Ethan barely dodged in time. The officer's energy blade slashed through the air, missing him by inches. Sparks flew as the blade struck the stone ground. Ethan rolled to the side and fired a quick shot. The officer dodged effortlessly. Too slow. Varish suddenly leaped from the side, her claws flashing. The officer blocked her attack with his armored forearm and kicked her away. She snarled, recovering fast. "He's fast." Ethan gritted his teeth. "We don't have time for this." The four-armed warrior roared and lunged at the officer, swinging a massive fist. The officer dodged, but the warrior's second arm caught him off guard, slamming him into the ground. Ethan didn't hesitate. He ran past the stunned officer and shouted to the others, "Go! Get to the tunnel." The prisoners surged forward, pushing through the weakened defenses. Varish sprinted beside Ethan. "Where is the entrance?" "Close," Ethan said, checking the map in his mind. "Just ahead." Then, a deep rumbling sound shook the arena. Ethan's stomach dropped. That's not good. From the far side of the Colosseum, a massive gate began to open. The crowd had been evacuated, leaving an eerie silence until the heavy thud of footsteps echoed through the arena. Ethan turned and froze. A massive, armored war beast stomped forward, its glowing red eyes locking onto the escaping prisoners. Thick metal plating covered its body, and twin cannons mounted on its back hummed with deadly energy. Varish hissed, "That is a problem." The four-armed warrior growled, "I will fight it." Ethan shook his head. "No, we stick to the plan. The tunnel is our goal." The beast let out a metallic roar and fired its cannons. The explosion ripped through the arena floor, sending stone and dust flying. Ethan grabbed Varish and dove behind cover. "Move. Now." Prisoners scattered, avoiding the deadly blasts. The Othar had unleashed their last weapon. If they didn't escape soon, they would all be slaughtered. Ethan's mind raced. How do we stop this thing? Then he saw it, a weakness. The beast's legs were heavily armored, but its joints, its knees, were exposed. Ethan turned to Varish. "We take out its legs." She nodded. "I see it." The four-armed warrior pounded his fists together. "Let's end this." Ethan sprinted forward, weaving through the chaos. The beast's cannons fired again, missing him by inches. Varish leaped onto a fallen pillar, then launched herself into the air. Her claws slashed at the beast's knee joint. Sparks flew as metal tore away. The four-armed warrior rushed forward, grabbing the beast's other leg. With a mighty roar, he pulled. The beast stumbled. Ethan didn't hesitate. He aimed his rifle and fired a precise shot, right into the damaged joint. Gang! The metal shattered. The beast let out a distorted roar as it collapsed. The prisoners cheered. Ethan didn't stop to celebrate. He turned to the others. "Go." They sprinted toward the tunnel entrance. The underground passage was dark and narrow, but it led outside. As they disappeared into the tunnel, Ethan took one last look at the arena. The place where so many had suffered was now the place where they had won. Then, with Varish and the others at his side, he stepped into the tunnel, toward freedom. The underground tunnel was dark and damp, the air thick with dust. The sounds of battle faded behind them as Ethan led the escapees forward. Their footsteps echoed against the stone walls, but no one spoke. Every prisoner knew they were not safe yet. Varish ran beside Ethan, her golden eyes scanning ahead. "How far does this tunnel go?" Ethan checked the map in his mind. "It should lead outside the city. If we keep moving, we can escape before the Othar send reinforcements." The four-armed warrior grunted. "Then we run." The group moved fast, their bodies tense, their breaths heavy. The tunnel stretched for miles, but at least it was clear. For now. Behind them, the Colosseum trembled from explosions. The Othar were furious. They would not let this escape go unpunished. A dangerous road ahead. After what felt like an eternity, the tunnel opened into a vast canyon. The rocky cliffs stretched high above, and a cold wind howled through the night air. Ethan stepped out first, his rifle raised. He scanned the horizon. No guards, no patrols. They had a chance. Varish emerged behind him, her ears flicking. We need to keep moving. The Othar will be searching for us. Ethan turned to the others. We need to find shelter. Does anyone know this area? A reptilian prisoner stepped forward. There is an old ruin in the mountains. It is abandoned, but it will give us cover. Ethan nodded. Good. Take us there. The escapees moved quickly, staying low as they crossed the canyon. Their bodies were exhausted, their wounds fresh, but none of them slowed. They had suffered too much to give up now. The hunt begins. High above, in the Othar command center, the warlord watched a screen. His claws tapped against the metal table, his red eyes burning with fury. The human. His voice was a low growl. He is the reason for this rebellion. An officer bowed before him. Yes, warlord. He led the prisoners to escape. The warlord's tail lashed behind him. Then he will suffer. He turned to his soldiers. Find them. Hunt them down. Kill the others, but bring me the human. Alive. The Othar warriors saluted. Then they moved out, their ships roaring into the night. The hunt had begun. A moment of rest. By the time Ethan and the others reached the mountain ruins, the twin moons were high in the sky. The structure was ancient, made of cracked stone and covered in vines. But it was strong. It would protect them. The four-armed warrior sat against a wall, breathing heavily. We made it. Varish crossed her arms. For now. Ethan knelt near a wounded prisoner, helping wrap a cloth around his arm. We can't stop here for long. He glanced at the sky. The Othar will come. Varish nodded. Then we must be ready. The escapees set to work. Some gathered rocks to block the entrance. Others checked stolen weapons. The air was tense, but for the first time in years, they were free. Ethan sat down against a wall, exhaling. His body ached from the battle. His wounds burned, but he couldn't rest yet. Varish sat beside him. You could have escaped alone. Her voice was quiet. Why did you stay to help? Ethan looked at her. Because I could. She frowned. That is not an answer. Ethan smiled slightly. Back on my world, we have a saying. Strength isn't about how much power you have. It's about how you use it. Varish studied him. You think your strength is in helping others. Ethan nodded. That's what makes us human. Varish was silent for a moment. Then, finally, she said, I am starting to understand. Before Ethan could respond, a loud boom echoed through the night. His heart stopped. They ran to the entrance and saw lights in the sky. Othar warships, coming straight for them. No more running. Ethan clenched his jaw. They found us. Varish cursed under her breath. That was fast. The four-armed warrior grabbed his weapon. Then we fight. Ethan took a deep breath. They couldn't run forever. The Othar would never stop hunting them. This had to end. He turned to the escapees. If we fight together. We're not slaves anymore. We stand as one. The prisoners, aliens of all kinds, looked at him. Then, one by one, they nodded. Ethan gripped his rifle. The Othar thought they were prey. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The night sky burned with the glow of Othar warships. Their engines roared like angry beasts as they descended upon the mountain ruins. Bright searchlights cut through the darkness, scanning for the escapees. Ethan stood at the entrance of the ruins, gripping his stolen Othar rifle. His heart pounded, but his mind was clear. This was it. Varish crouched beside him, her claws flexing. They come fast. The four-armed warrior cracked his knuckles. Good. I was growing bored. Ethan glanced at the prisoners behind him. They had no armor, no advanced weapons, only stolen rifles and makeshift defenses. They were outnumbered, outgunned, but they had something stronger. They had hope. He turned to them. We're not running anymore. The Othar think they own us. They think they can break us. He raised his rifle. But tonight, we fight back. A roar erupted from the escapees. The fire in their eyes burned brighter than any weapon. Ethan took a deep breath. Here we go. The first attack. The first Othar dropship landed at the base of the mountain. Its metal ramp hissed open, and a squad of heavily armored warriors stormed out, weapons raised. Ethan didn't wait. He fired first. His rifle cracked through the night, hitting the lead soldier in the shoulder. The Othar stumbled, but the others charged forward. Hold the entrance, Ethan shouted. Blaster fire filled the air as the escapees fought back. Varish leaped from the ruins, moving faster than the eye could follow. She landed among the Othar, her claws slashing through armor. The four-armed warrior grabbed a fallen enemy's gun and fired with two hands, while swinging a broken metal beam with the others. He roared as he fought, a living storm of destruction. Ethan ducked behind a rock, reloading. He peeked over and saw more dropships coming. Too many. Varish landed beside him, breathing hard. We cannot hold forever. Ethan gritted his teeth. We don't need forever, just long enough. A desperate plan. Ethan's mind raced. They couldn't win in a head-on fight. The Othar were stronger. But maybe there was another way. He turned to the reptilian prisoner who had guided them. You said these ruins were old. Do they have tunnels? The prisoner nodded. Yes, deep inside. But they are unstable. Ethan's eyes lit up. Perfect. Varish tilted her head. You want to trap them? Ethan grinned. Exactly. He turned to the group. Everyone, fall back inside. Lure them in. The escapees obeyed, retreating into the ruins. The Othar, thinking their prey was cornered, charged after them. Ethan, Varish, and the four-armed warrior stayed behind, waiting. When the last Othar entered the ruins, Ethan nodded. Now, the four-armed warrior lifted a massive rock and slammed it down. The weakened structure of above collapsed. Boom! The ground shook as tons of rock crashed down, sealing the entrance. The Othar inside were trapped. For a moment, there was silence. Then the remaining prisoners cheered. The final battle. But it wasn't over yet. Above them, one last warship hovered. It was larger than the others, its black metal covered in glowing red symbols. The warlord himself had arrived. The ship's doors opened, and a massive figure stepped out. His armor gleamed under the moonlight. His reptilian eyes locked onto Ethan. You, his deep voice echoed through the canyon. You think you have won. Ethan stepped forward. I know we have. The warlord laughed. I admire your spirit, human. But you are weak. He raised his massive sword. I will end this myself. The four-armed warrior moved forward, but Ethan stopped him. This one's mine. Varish looked at Ethan. Are you sure? Ethan smirked. I've come this far. Might as well finish the job. The duel. The warlord charged, swinging his massive blade. Ethan dodged, barely avoiding the strike. The ground cracked where the sword hit. Ethan fired his rifle, but the warlord moved fast. He dodged the shots and slammed his tail into Ethan's chest. Crack. Ethan flew back, hitting the ground hard. Pain shot through his ribs. The warlord sneered. Pathetic. Ethan coughed but forced himself to stand. Not done yet. He remembered his own words. Strength isn't just power. It's how you use it. The warlord rushed forward for the final strike. But Ethan was ready. At the last second, he rolled aside. The warlord's sword struck the ground and got stuck. Ethan didn't hesitate. He grabbed a fallen Othar grenade and threw it at the warlord's feet. Boom! The explosion sent the warlord flying. He crashed against a rock. His armor cracked, His sword shattered. Ethan limped forward, aiming his rifle at the fallen warlord. It's over. The warlord coughed, struggling to move. His red eyes burned with rage. But he knew the truth. Ethan had won. Victory. The remaining Othar soldiers saw their leader defeated. Without him, they had no will to fight. They retreated. As the last warship flew away, the escapees stood in stunned silence. Then the four-armed warrior raised his fists. "We are free." The canyon erupted with cheers. Varish turned to Ethan, her golden eyes filled with something new. Respect. "You did it." Ethan shook his head. "We did it." For the first time in years, they were no longer prisoners. They were free. But Ethan knew this was just the beginning. The galaxy had underestimated humans, and now it would never forget them. The dust had settled. The night sky was clear once again. The Othar warships had fled, their forces defeated. The battle was over. Ethan stood at the edge of the ruins, looking at the horizon. His body ached, his wounds burned, but he didn't care. They had won. Behind him, the former prisoners gathered. Some were treating wounds, others were sitting in exhausted relief. The air was filled with quiet murmurs, whispers of disbelief. They were free. Varish stepped beside him. "I still cannot believe it." Ethan smirked. "Believe it." She looked at him with those golden eyes, something different in her gaze now. Admiration. Respect. The four-armed warrior walked up, his massive frame still covered in dust. "So, human, what now? Do we just wait for the Othar to return?" Ethan exhaled. "No." He turned to the others. "We don't wait. We prepare." The crowd fell silent, listening. Ethan continued, his voice firm. "The Othar will come back. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow. But they won't forget this. And next time, they'll bring more ships, more weapons." He clenched his fists. "We can't let them take us again. We need to fight." A murmur spread through the group. Fear, uncertainty. Varish crossed her arms. "We have no ships, no army. How do we fight?" Ethan smiled. "We start small. We become something they fear." He looked around at the aliens before him. Once prisoners, now survivors. A rebellion. A galaxy awakens. The word hung in the air. Rebellion. For so long, these people had been slaves. The idea of fighting back had been nothing more than a dream. But tonight, that dream felt real. The four-armed warrior chuckled. "You humans, always thinking big." Ethan shrugged. "It's what we do." Varish nodded. "Then we need a base, a place to train, to build weapons." The reptilian prisoner spoke up. "I know a place, an abandoned spaceport, hidden in an asteroid field. The Othar avoid it because of the storms." Ethan grinned. "Sounds perfect." The group slowly came together. They had no fleet, no resources, but they had each other, and they had a leader. Varish looked at Ethan. "You should be the one to lead us." Ethan blinked. "Me." The four-armed warrior smirked. "Who else? You gave us hope. You gave us freedom." The others nodded. Ethan hesitated. He had never wanted to be a leader. He had only done what he thought was right. But looking at these people, he knew they needed him. Finally, he nodded. "All right, let's build a rebellion." A new fire burned in their eyes. The galaxy had seen them as prey. Now, they would become hunters, leaving the past behind. The next morning, they gathered supplies and prepared for the journey. The Othar warships were gone, but their threat still loomed. Varish approached Ethan as he checked a stolen communicator. "We should move fast." Ethan nodded. Agreed. He looked at the ruins one last time. This place had been their prison, but now it was just the past. The four-armed warrior cracked his knuckles. "Ready?" Ethan grinned. "Let's go." They set out, heading toward a new future. A future where they weren't slaves. A future where they fought back. The Othar thought they had won. They had no idea what was coming. The Othar's response. Far away, deep in Othar territory, the warlord sat on his throne. His wounds were still fresh, his pride shattered. A commander kneeled before him. The human escaped. The warlord's claws dug into his throne. I know. The commander hesitated. And the rebellion. The warlord's eyes burned with fury. Crush it. Find them. Kill them all. The commander bowed and left. The warlord stared at the holographic display before him. It showed a single figure, a human. His rage turned to something else. Curiosity. This human had done something no one else had. He had turned slaves into warriors. For the first time, the warlord felt something he had never felt toward a human. Fear. A legend begins. As the escapees traveled toward their new home, Ethan looked up at the stars. He had no idea what the future held. But one thing was certain. This was just the beginning. Because humans, they'd never stop fighting.